At 9 minutes and 50 seconds past 5, on the morning of Saturday, the 13th of June, a camera bolted to a boardwalk in Yellowstone National Park recorded a dark plume of steam jetting out of the ground. Not out of a geyser, not out of a hot spring, out of flat, barren dirt that had never done anything in recorded memory. That was the opening. What happened over the next 5 days is why I am making this video. By the 14th, geologists were standing on that ground taking measurements. By the 16th, part of the ground they had walked on was gone, collapsed inward, filled with boiling water and thumping. By the 18th, that new pool was throwing water 20 to 30 feet into the air on its own. All of it 100 meters from the best instrumented patch of thermal ground on Earth. Now, you have heard the words Yellowstone and Supervolcano in a sentence often enough to be tired of it. So let me be plain about what this is. I am not going to tell you the caldera is waking up. I am also not going to tell you nothing is happening, because something is, and it is more specific and more interesting than the version you have been handed. The question is this: is Yellowstone entering a new phase? And if so, which one? There is a real answer. It has 3 parts. You are not getting any of them until we have been through the evidence, because the answer only means something once you have seen what that ground did over 5 days, and what happened at a different feature in this same park 37 years ago. No guessing, no dramatizing, just the numbers, the mechanism, and the stakes. Before we start, have you ever stood in a thermal basin? Tell me in the comments where, and whether anyone told you why the boardwalk is there. Subscribe if you want to know when the ground does something worth knowing about. And a thumbs up helps. Let us go for 5,000. Now, let us get into it. Just after 5:09 in the morning, monitoring equipment inside Biscuit Basin registered 2 signals at once: seismic energy, the ground physically moving, and infrasound, acoustic energy below the range of human hearing, the pressure signature of something venting hard into the air. Both pointed toward Black Diamond Pool. That name will mean something if you follow this park. On the 23rd of July, 2024, at 9:53 in the morning, Black Diamond Pool detonated. It laid over 1,400 rocks bigger than 16 inches across around the pool, destroyed a stretch of boardwalk that visitors had been standing on, and by something close to a miracle, hurt nobody. Biscuit Basin has been closed ever since, so the obvious assumption was that it had done it again. The data said no, and the way it said no is elegant. There is a temperature sensor that records eruptions from that pool. When Black Diamond Pool erupts, that sensor shows a rapid drop as the pool empties. On the 13th, it showed a small heat blip, then a slow drift down toward air temperature. Nothing like an eruption. Something had exploded. The seismic and infrasound records were unambiguous, but not the pool everyone had been watching for 2 years. The camera settled it. The Yellowstone Volcano Observatory installed a webcam at Black Diamond Pool in mid-May 2025, and that morning it happened to be pointed the right way. At 5:09:50, it caught the plume, coming out of the ground 30 to 60 meters north of the pool. Hold on to that. For 2 years, every instrument and every article had been aimed at one specific pool. The ground opened up beside it, where nobody was looking. Park geologists were on site the next day. They found 3 groups of new vents. The northern group was still running, a crack trending north-northwest, 18.5 meters long, 61 feet, and in places 1.5 meters wide. Long enough to lay a bus in, wide enough in spots to swallow a person, in ground that had been solid the previous morning. The water in it was 90 degrees Celsius. And I want the precise version rather than the dramatic one because it is better. At that elevation, water boils at about 93 degrees. So this was sitting 3 degrees below boiling, which tells you it came up from somewhere hotter and lost a little heat on the way. The rocks thrown out around that crack went a few meters at most. Judged purely on force, this was a minor event, and the USGS says so plainly. The middle group was 5 small vents, still 85 degrees the next day. The southern group, nearest the pool, was another linear vent about 15 meters long with 89-degree water sitting in the fractured rubble. You could see the result from the road. That morning, the Firehole River turned a pale, milky gray, the color of water carrying a heavy load of fine sediment, from Biscuit Basin all the way down to Midway Geyser Basin, about 6 kilometers. 2 brand new runoff channels were visible all day. That gray water is a receipt, physical proof that the plumbing under Biscuit Basin had just flushed its own insides into a river. So how does a thing like this happen? Yellowstone is not hot because there is lava near the surface. There is not. What sits underneath is rock that is hot but overwhelmingly solid, and it warms the rock above it the way a stove warms a pan. The water is not volcanic either. It is rain and snowmelt, sinking through fractured rhyolite until it reaches rock hot enough to heat it, then rising again. That water is loaded with dissolved silica, picked up from the rock at depth. As it rises and cools, the silica comes out of solution and plates onto the walls of the channels it is traveling through, a hard, glassy lining that thickens over time. And that lining is effectively impermeable. Given enough time, it can seal a pathway shut. A channel that had been safely venting heat and pressure to the surface gets capped. Now the water underneath has nowhere to go. Pressure rises, temperature rises. What you have is superheated water held under pressure beneath a mineral lid. A pressure cooker, a few feet underground people walk across all summer. From the surface, it looks like dirt. When the seal fails, pressure drops instantly and that water flashes to steam. Water becoming steam expands enormously and very fast, and the ground above it goes. That is the 13th of June. But the explosion was not the end of it. It was day 1. The geology team came back 2 days later and found something that stopped them. Between Sunday evening the 14th and Tuesday morning the 16th, a new pool had appeared near the middle vents, vigorously boiling, gray, silty, about 6.5 meters by 5.3, 21 feet by 17. Ground they had walked across 2 days earlier was now boiling water, and it was thumping. That is the word in the USGS write-up. Steam bubbles forming down in the pool and collapsing, producing a knock that the team said startled them. These are people who work in thermal basins for a living, and the ground was making a noise that made them jump. Here is what matters about that pool, and it is not the size. Most new features that appear suddenly in Yellowstone are explosion craters, and you can identify them instantly because a blast leaves an apron of ejected rock ringing the hole. This pool had no apron, no ejecta at all, which means, according to the USGS, it did not form by explosion. It formed by collapse. The ground sank into the hot zone underneath it, and the hole filled with boiling water. Think about what that tells you. An explosion is a single release, violent, over in seconds. A collapse means the material underneath had been removed or weakened until it could no longer hold its own weight. It means that for 2 days, while geologists walked across it and took notes, that surface was already hollow and simply had not given up yet. Then, on Thursday the 18th, the camera caught the new pool spouting. Intermittent episodes throwing boiling water 6 to 9 meters, 20 to 30 feet. Between episodes, geologists described it as roiling. So, day 1, explosion and 3 sets of vents. Days 2 to 3, the ground collapses and a boiling pool appears. Day 5, that pool starts erupting on its own. The hazard did not end when the noise stopped, which brings me to 100 meters. 328 feet. That is the distance from the explosion to the Biscuit Basin Monitoring Station, a multi-parameter installation established in late July 2025. 11 months before the ground opened beside it. According to the USGS, no hydrothermal explosion has ever occurred this close to a monitoring station, anywhere. Look at 2024 to see why that matters. When Black Diamond Pool blew, the larger event, the one that took the boardwalk, there was no hydrothermal monitoring station in that basin, no camera, no acoustic sensors. One of the most consequential explosions in the park's modern history happened, and scientists worked backwards from scattered rock. Everything since has been a response to that gap. Camera in May 2025, multi-parameter station in late July 2025, and then the ground exploded 100 meters from it. Distance is the enemy of detail. A seismometer kilometers away records a smeared wiggle. 100 meters away, it records the sharp fingerprint of rock fracturing. An infrasound sensor beside the vent captures the actual sound of steam breaching the surface, not a muffled echo. A camera timestamps the plume to the half-second. The observatory said it would spend the following weeks going through that data hunting for precursors, any signal that an explosion was coming. 7 weeks on, as I record this, they have not published what they found. Hold that, because there is one case in this park where we do know what a precursor looked like. Norris Geyser Basin, September 1989. There was a feature there called Porkchop Geyser, named in the 1960s because it was a small pool about 3 meters across, shaped like a pork chop. For years, it did very little. Irregular activity, sometimes years of quiet, small eruptions out of a triangular opening only an inch or two across. That tiny vent worked as a throttle. It kept things small. Then it started changing. Eruptions 3 to 5 meters high began in 1971. And in 1985, Porkchop stopped being an intermittent geyser and became a perpetual spouter, continuously erupting to a height of 6 to 9 meters. 6 to 9 meters, 20 to 30 feet. You have already heard that number in this video. Porkchop held that for 4 years. Then, on the 5th of September 1989, at 20 minutes to 3 in the afternoon, with 8 visitors watching, the column shot up to 20 or 30 meters and the geyser exploded. It threw blocks of silica sinter nearly 2 meters across, some landing over 200 feet away, and left a crater about 14 meters long, ringed by a berm you can still see. The vent had constricted itself shut. Silica doing exactly what I described. The throttle closed and the feature destroyed itself. Now the part that speaks to those instruments sitting 100 meters from the June explosion. Porkchop's water had been sampled since the 1920s. Afterwards, the USGS geochemist Robert Fournier went back through that record using geothermometry, reading from the dissolved chemistry of surface water how hot the rock was where that water last sat long enough to equilibrate. You cannot lower a thermometer hundreds of meters into fractured rock, but the water comes up carrying a message about the temperature down there. Fournier found the last equilibration temperature had climbed 60 to 70 degrees Celsius between 1962 and 1989. The system had been heating up in the chemistry for 27 years before it blew. Nobody read it that way at the time. It was only visible looking backwards. And the new pool at Biscuit Basin is doing 6 to 9 meters. I am not telling you it will do what Porkchop did. It might settle. Most of them do. But it is the first time a feature has been watched on camera from birth through collapse into spouting. And there is exactly one well-documented case of where that behavior can lead. The pattern at Biscuit Basin runs longer than June, too. Since the 2024 explosion, Black Diamond Pool has erupted repeatedly. Twice in July 2025, again in August, at least 3 times in December, again in March 2026, and at least twice more in late June. That is not a system that blew once and settled. It is shallow plumbing that has been rearranging itself for 2 years. Before the obvious question, keep the scale straight. Small hydrothermal explosions like this one happen somewhere in Yellowstone roughly every year or two. Most are in the backcountry and nobody sees them. Genuinely large ones come every few thousand years, and they are on another scale entirely. The largest hydrothermal explosion crater documented anywhere in the world is Mary Bay, on the north edge of Yellowstone Lake, a mile and a half across, blasted out about 13,800 years ago. And the USGS is explicit that even those enormous events are independent of volcanism. They are not the supervolcano either. So the 13th of June sits at the small and frequent end of a very long scale. What is not routine is where it happened and what the ground did for 5 days afterwards while people watched. Which brings us to the claim that floods the internet every time this park does anything. The supervolcano is waking up. New vents, new steam, new pools. The final warning. Let us go to the instruments. As of the 1st of July 2026, Yellowstone's volcano alert level is normal, and the aviation color code is green. In June, the month the ground opened, the University of Utah located 118 earthquakes in the region. The largest was magnitude 2.4, a tremor you would not feel standing on top of it. The park averages 1 to 2,000 a year. Deformation shows no significant uplift or subsidence since January. And then there is the rock. Go back to those 1,400 fragments from 2024. Sandstone, siltstone, glacial debris. All of it material that exists within 50 meters of the surface. Not one piece of the deep rhyolite bedrock. If magma were driving this, the ejecta would say so. It does not. That explosion sampled the top 175 feet of ground and nothing below it. Mike Poland, the scientist in charge of the observatory, has put it plainly. The magma chamber is mostly solid and nothing is brewing. So, is Yellowstone entering a new phase? Yes, 3 of them. Not one is the one you were warned about. The first is Biscuit Basin itself, and this is not really debatable now. A major explosion in 2024, a drumbeat of eruptions through 2025 and into 2026, then in June, a new explosion opening 3 vent groups in ground with no history, followed by a collapse, followed by a new spouting feature. That shallow system is unstable and actively reorganizing, and it has not finished. That is a genuine new phase. It is about 6 feet of ground, not 6 miles. The second, almost nobody has reported. The caldera's deformation behavior changed. Yellowstone has been subsiding for years on a seasonal rhythm, and this past winter was the first since 2015 to 2016 with no caldera subsidence at all. The observatory's own words are a subtle change in the style of caldera deformation, not magma rising. A change in the rhythm of the ground's slow breathing, which the people watching it daily thought worth writing down. That is what a real anomaly looks like when a scientist reports one. Small, specific, carefully worded. The third will matter longest. These explosions have been almost impossible to study. Small, sudden, usually in the backcountry with nobody standing there holding instruments. On the 13th of June, one happened inside a monitoring network for the first time. If there is a precursor in that data, this field gets its first foothold on forecasting. If there is nothing, if the record shows quiet right up to the instant of failure, that is worth knowing too, and it is the more sobering answer. Either result is a first. Neither has anything to do with a super eruption, and that is what the doom framing costs people. It aims fear at a magma chamber miles down and away from the thing that has already destroyed a boardwalk full of visitors within living memory. So here is what to do with this. If you go to Yellowstone or any thermal area anywhere, Rotorua, Iceland, Beppu, stay on the boardwalk every time. Not because of a rule, but because you now know what is under it. A lid of silica-sealed crust over water above boiling, with no way to tell by looking which patch is which. The ground that opened on the 13th of June had no feature on it. It was dirt. Do not step off for a photograph. Do not let a child run ahead. And if an area is closed, somebody wrote down a reason. Biscuit Basin has been shut since July 2024, and that closure is the only reason this is a science story instead of a casualty story. That system has been sealing itself and blowing its seals for as long as there has been water and heat in the same rock, and it will go on long after everyone watching this is gone. We cannot stop it. We cannot yet predict it. But on one morning in June, for the first time in the history of this science, the ground opened up inside a circle of listening instruments, and whatever it said in the seconds before it went, we have the recording. That is the new phase. Not a countdown. A microphone, finally in the right place. Tell me in the comments about the thermal ground you have stood on. Subscribe if you want to know when that data comes back. And thank you for giving me this much of your afternoon. I will see you next time.